They moved into the neighborhood just after New Year's, in that stretch of cold that settles like a second skin over the Midwest. It wasn't the biggest house on the block, nor the newest, but it sat on a quiet cul-de-sac with good bones, good soil, and the kind of open sky that Sarah liked. She had seen too many places with no horizon, places where the walls felt too close, and this seemed like a place you could breathe. Her daughter Ellie picked her room with the best light, and they planted a solar-powered motion light above the garage on the second day, half out of habit, and half because the night around here was darker than they were used to. And one told them the light would start a war. The first complaint came 2 weeks in, a politely phrased note tucked under their welcome mat, asking if they might reconsider the fixture because it disrupted the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. Sarah read it once, twice, then folded it away in the drawer where she kept unpaid bills and other minor threats. She'd dealt with worse. Years of Navy SEAL service had conditioned her nerves to steel and her instincts to trust no first warning. She replaced the light with a softer bulb and thought that would be the end of it. But this neighborhood had its own rules, unwritten and enforced not by law, but by fear. Karen Burnell introduced herself at the next HOA meeting. She was in her 50s, wore beige like a uniform, and smiled with her teeth, not her eyes. She brought cupcakes with the HOA minutes printed on napkins, and referred to herself as a community facilitator. Mason, her son, hovered at her elbow, tall and quiet with eyes that flicked too quickly from one person to another. Something about him made Sarah's gut twitch, though she didn't say it aloud. Karen's eyes settled on Sarah like she was trying to figure out how a woman like her ended up here, in a place full of lawn ornaments and conformity. Sarah just smiled back. The second complaint came with a fine, $75 for a non-compliant exterior fixture. Sarah appealed it through the online portal. 3 days later, someone keyed her truck. Ellie came home from school talking about a man who stood by the corner mailbox every morning when she left, never speaking, just watching. At first, Sarah chalked it up to a neighbor's routine, but the man matched Mason's build, and the mailbox was out of the way. She didn't panic. She installed cameras, real ones, and made sure Ellie knew how to use the emergency lock system on every door. She didn't share her growing concern with Ellie's father, Mark, who was still deployed for 2 more months. He worried enough. She'd built a life on managing threats, and this felt familiar in all the worst ways. The fire happened on a Tuesday, just after midnight. Sarah woke first, smoke stinging her eyes before the alarm screamed. She grabbed Ellie and rolled out the back window before the flames reached the second floor. The house was mostly ash by dawn. Fire investigators later said it looked electrical, but Sarah knew better. The solar light was gone, the fuse box tampered with. The gasoline set clung to everything, even the scorched mailbox across the street. They stayed with a neighbor, one of the few who hadn't turned away when things began. His name was Don, a retired postal worker who remembered when this block used to be decent. "They'll say it was random," he muttered that morning, handing Sarah black coffee. "But that boy Mason's been out every night. They ain't random when they watch you first." Karen called the next afternoon, expressing deep sorrow, and offering a pre-written condolence card signed from the HOA board. It wasn't even handwritten. Sarah didn't answer. What she did instead was rebuild, not just the house, but her footing. Insurance cleared quicker than expected, probably because they didn't want Sarah digging too deep. She knew the look people gave her once they saw her background, military, tactical, too composed. But she also knew how to play slow. The new house rose on the same footprint, but with modifications. No overhanging eaves, no blind corners, sightlines from every window. Steel reinforced doors. A perimeter alert system that was technically illegal in a civilian zone, but disguised well enough as a Wi-Fi extender. Ellie's room stayed in the same corner, this time with a fire ladder built into the wall. The solar light came back, brighter, higher, and directly above a new camera. Then Sarah started watching back. She found the first hidden camera in a landscaping stone near the curb. It wasn't hers. It was military grade, low power, long battery, disguised to withstand rain and heat. The second one was in the motion light she hadn't installed. It was Mason's model, the kind she'd seen overseas, with embedded firmware designed to broadcast to a nearby receiver. It wasn't paranoia. It was a pattern. Sarah documented every piece, traced every signal. She found an encrypted burst transmitter buried under the flower bed, encrypted, but not immune to interference. With a little work, she jammed it and rerouted its signal to her own server. Every video Mason saw, she now saw too. Ellie started to notice the changes. The tightness in Sarah's voice, the way she scanned driveways before pulling into theirs. So Sarah did what she hadn't done in years. She brought her daughter in, piece by piece. Taught her how to notice patterns. Which noises didn't belong. Where to walk quietly. It was a dangerous thing, teaching a child to survive, but it was more dangerous to pretend they weren't under siege. They began to collect evidence. Ellie journaled everything, strange mail, repeated knocks at 3 a.m., a new trash bin that wasn't theirs but appeared outside the house twice. Inside, it held nothing but garden gnomes. All smiling. All facing inward. Sarah photographed each one. The police were useless. Reports were filed politely. Officers shrugged, citing lack of proof. Karen's influence ran deeper than Sarah initially thought. City permits, fire marshals, even neighborhood watch all had Karen's name somewhere on the chain of command. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted to take on a woman who could make your taxes spike or your trash, mysteriously, go uncollected for weeks. But Sarah didn't need them. She had proof now. The night Mason broke into the new house, he didn't know he was walking into a trap. Sarah had anticipated the breach. She watched his shadow creep across the backyard on the thermal feed, saw the reflection of a tactical knife in the neighbor's window. She didn't call the police. She didn't even wait by the door. Instead, she opened the garage, stood in the middle, and waited. Her old gear fit tighter now, but the blade on her hip felt as familiar as breath. Mason didn't make it to the second step. She stopped short of hurting him. Just enough pressure, Just enough pain to make a point. His voice broke when he asked, "Why are you doing this?" She didn't answer then. Not with words. She let him go, after disabling his phone, taking his cameras, and tagging his tires with UV ink. Let him run. Let him live with the knowledge that he had been bested. It wasn't about revenge. It was about dominance, clarity, justice. Sarah knew this wouldn't end in arrests or neat conclusions. The kind of war they were in didn't come with medals or parades. It came with silence, with watching your back, with rebuilding smarter and faster each time someone tried to erase you. Ellie planted her first rose bush that spring. Sarah helped her lay the soil. In the center of the garden, they placed one of the smiling gnomes, repainted in camouflage. A joke between them, a symbol. Not of fear, but of survival. The neighborhood never really talked about what happened that night. Some said they hadn't heard a thing. Others claimed to have seen Mason limping away, but chose not to get involved. Sarah didn't care. She had never expected help, and after what she uncovered next, she knew why the silence ran so deep. The days that followed Mason's attempted break-in brought more than just tension. They brought clarity. Sarah began tracking signal pings, triangulating data from the jerry-rigged surveillance network Mason had left behind. With her military training and a few favors called in from former tech contacts, she uncovered a web of connections that made her blood run cold. There wasn't just one network of cameras. There were dozens. Embedded in the yards, trash cans, and roofs of over 20 homes in the HOA's jurisdiction. Many of the devices pointed not outward, as if to watch for threats, but inward, aimed at bedrooms, driveways, back patios. The intent was clear: control through visibility. Karen and Mason had built a grid of fear, a surveillance empire in miniature, dressed in the guise of neighborhood protection. It wasn't just tech. It was psychology. Sarah started mapping it. Each household with a violation, a fine, a mysterious maintenance delay. Those were homes where the cameras pointed directly. Elderly couples, single mothers, immigrant families. Vulnerable targets. The pattern was surgical: pick a weakness, isolate it, escalate with fear. Most residents had no idea they were being watched, and those who suspected were too afraid to speak. Sarah compiled everything: images, heat maps, intercepted footage. She documented patterns of movement, timestamps, and audio clips where Karen's voice could be heard orchestrating the quiet bullying of a resident who hadn't trimmed their hedges. To code. It was all part of the HOA bylaws, weaponized and distorted. One woman had lost her home over unpaid fines that ballooned into liens. Another had been pushed into an assisted living facility after complaints of delusional paranoia, when in reality, her yard had been under constant video surveillance for over a year. Ellie kept journaling. Her sketches turned darker, eyes behind windows, shapes in the trees, notes about which houses left their lights on all night. Sarah worried sometimes about what all this was doing to her daughter, but she also saw strength there. A quiet fire. Ellie wasn't afraid anymore. She understood the stakes. Then came the incident with the school counselor. Sarah was called in for a routine check-in. Nothing alarming, just a few questions about Ellie's drawings. One showed a man in a hoodie with wires running from his fingers to houses on the street. Another showed flames licking the side of a house, with a family inside. The counselor's tone was gentle but laced with concern. "She's very aware of her environment," Sarah said evenly. The counselor hesitated. "That's the thing. She's too aware. Hypervigilance like this can be a sign of trauma or domestic stress." Sarah leaned forward. "It's a sign of survival." She pulled out a flash drive, placed it on the desk. "You're mandated to report abuse, right? Good. Take this. Watch what real abuse looks like." The counselor didn't say another word. 3 days later, an unmarked vehicle parked outside Sarah's home. Inside was a man named Joshua Kerr, a private investigator who'd been tracking HOA corruption cases for nearly a decade. He received the footage through an anonymous tip and came to verify its authenticity. Sarah verified it. "All right, down to the circuit specs on each hidden cam. You have enough here," he told her, "to bury them. But you also have to know, you're on a list now." She laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was obvious. Kerr helped connect her with a freelance journalist named Zoe Hart, who ran a digital column called The Undermined. Zoe specialized in small-scale corruption stories, things too local for the national news cycle, but too big to ignore. She flew in the following week and interviewed Sarah, Ellie, and Dawn. What emerged was a slow-burning exposé titled, "Behind the Hedges: How One HOA Built a Neighborhood Surveillance State." The article dropped like a grenade. Within hours, downloads spiked. Other residents began coming forward. A former HOA secretary admitted she had been forced to sign off on inflated fines or risk her own home being targeted. Another resident, a veteran like Sarah, shared how he'd found a motion sensor hidden behind his air vent. A quiet rebellion began forming. Group chats were created. Residents met at night in garages, on porches, in backyards, anywhere they felt they couldn't be heard. Karen tried to discredit the story. She issued statements through the HOA newsletter, painting Sarah as unstable, paranoid, and aggressive. She pointed to Mason's hospital record, framing him as the real victim. She claimed the footage was doctored, but the story had already grown roots. A city council meeting 2 weeks later turned into a public spectacle. Dozens of residents, many elderly and frightened but furious, stood and told their stories. The council seemed shocked, some genuinely so, others pretending for the cameras. One councilman, Richard Belmonte, spoke out in Karen's defense, calling the allegations exaggerated and conspiratorial. He had ties to the HOA, Sarah learned, investment interests in the land beneath several foreclosed homes. It was deeper than just Karen and Mason. This was about money, influence, control. Zoe dug further and uncovered documents showing Karen's HOA had received unusually high fines and foreclosure powers through a quiet vote passed with Belmonte's approval 2 years earlier. The process had been shady, bypassing standard legal reviews. That's when federal eyes finally turned toward them. The Department of Housing and Urban Development opened a file. Several civil rights attorneys reached out. Sarah handed over everything: footage, statements, diagrams. She wanted no fame, no lawsuit payout. Just safety. Just peace. And then, Mason disappeared. It wasn't immediate. He vanished from neighborhood view first. No more late night drives. No more shadows in the backyard. Then came the rumor he'd skipped town, fearing prosecution. Another version said he was hiding in Karen's lake house upstate. A third claimed he'd gone back to work in private security, this time abroad. Sarah didn't care. His silence was better than his presence. Karen, however, wasn't done. 2 weeks after the expose, she filed a defamation suit against Sarah, Ellie, and even Zoe. The paperwork was thick, petty, and full of venom. It claimed emotional distress, reputational harm, and even interference with contractual community responsibilities. But the suit backfired. In court, Sarah's legal team presented video evidence, community testimony, and Zoe's report, backed by forensic experts. Karen's credibility unraveled under cross-examination, especially when it was revealed she faked invoices for HOA repairs that never happened. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice. Outside the courthouse, neighbors clapped as Sarah walked out holding Ellie's hand. It wasn't a parade, but it was enough. The house, rebuilt once again, stood taller this time, not literally, but in spirit. Ellie redesigned the garden. No gnomes, no symbolism, just lavender, sunflowers, and herbs. Things that grew and healed. Sarah installed one last camera, this one pointed inward, into the living room. Not to monitor danger, but to remind herself they were home now. Really home. Some battles scar you. Others teach you who you are. Sarah didn't think of herself as a hero. She was tired, often afraid, and always aware. But she had done what needed to be done. For Ellie. For their peace. For the silence that meant security, not surveillance. The sun came up earlier now, or maybe it just felt that way. Peace, they say, is the absence of fear. But Sarah had learned better. True peace was the ability to live without constantly preparing for war, and that kind of peace had to be earned. Months passed. The neighborhood changed in subtle ways. The homeowners association was still there, technically, but gutted. Karen had resigned under community pressure, her influence dismantled bit by resident votes, and legal limitations imposed after a formal investigation. The board was now made up of people Sarah barely knew, but finally trusted. People who talked about things like transparency, accessibility, and healing. The homes once monitored were now free of hidden wires and lenses. Residents removed their faux rocks and metal garden fixtures, some tearing out planters, or repainting entire patios just to feel clean again. It was symbolic as much as practical. A kind of purging. Sarah helped some of them, mostly the elderly, the ones who'd been too scared to speak until it was all over. She fixed motion lights, showed them how to spot a tampered router, taught them to secure their networks without paranoia. Ellie grew quieter, but not withdrawn. Her journal shifted from diagrams and observations to drawings of flowers and people, neighbors, her school friends, even her mom. Once, Sarah caught a sketch of their house, framed by birds and ivy. She didn't say anything, just kissed Ellie's forehead and closed the book. It was enough. Don took a job in the city, something low stress and creative. He said he needed to work with his hands again. He started woodworking, crafting benches and fences from salvaged lumber. He offered to build new fencing for anyone in the neighborhood who needed it, free of charge. His quiet way of mending what had been broken. Sarah tried therapy. It didn't stick. She wasn't ready to talk about Mason, about the guilt of sparing him. Some days, she second-guessed it, wondered if letting him go would lead to more chaos elsewhere. But she always came back to that night, to the moment when vengeance would have been easy, and chose control instead. She wasn't his judge. Just his reckoning. Zoe's article series won awards. More importantly, it sparked conversations across the country about HOA overreach and residential surveillance. One network even invited Sarah to speak on a panel about neighborhood rights and civilian privacy, but she declined. "I'm not the face of anything," she told Zoe. "I'm just someone who refused to be afraid." Even so, the movement grew. Online forums began compiling reports of HOA abuses. People cited Sarah's case in legal arguments, lobbying efforts, and even classroom debates. What began in a cul-de-sac had become a national story. Still, Sarah stayed out of the spotlight. She didn't want interviews or podcasts. She wanted her garden, her family, and her space. Then, in spring, something unexpected arrived. A letter. It was handwritten, no return address. The penmanship was neat, almost militaristic. Inside, just a single line. "You won, but I'm not done watching." No signature. No clue who sent it. Sarah stared at it for a long time. Then she burned it. She didn't panic. She didn't install more cameras or sleep with a weapon by her bed. She didn't tell Ellie or Dawn. Instead, she took a walk around the block, slow, deliberate. She watched her neighbors laugh and water their lawns. She breathed in the scent of grass and sun-warmed pavement. She kept walking until the adrenaline faded, replaced by a stillness she hadn't felt in years. Watching was fine. Let them watch. She'd survive worse than being observed. She'd survive being hunted, being burned out, being erased. If someone wanted to lurk in the shadows again, let them see what it looked like when their target refused to run, because Sarah had rebuilt herself. Not just the house, not just the routines, but her very instincts. She no longer moved reactively. She moved with purpose. She didn't just defend anymore. She built forward. She began organizing safety workshops with other military families. Nothing aggressive, no paranoia, no tactical rollouts. Just the basics, securing your home without losing your joy. She spoke about invisible wounds, and how silence isn't always safety. Her message was simple. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You just have to stay standing. One of the men she worked with was a retired Marine who confessed he'd been followed by private investigators after refusing an HOA buyout. He was bitter, angry, ready to fight fire with fire. Sarah told him what she told herself again and again. The goal isn't to destroy them. The goal is to make them irrelevant. By summer, Ellie had turned the garden into a small business. She sold lavender satchels and basil pots to neighbors, started a YouTube channel about plants and healing. Her confidence bloomed like the flowers she tended. She was no longer the little girl hiding in corners. She was a creator, a builder, a survivor in her own right. And one evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Sarah sat on the porch and watched Ellie explain composting to a kid from down the street. It was nothing remarkable, yet everything sacred. Ordinary peace, finally earned. In the distance, a car slowed down. Sarah noticed but didn't react. It wasn't Mason. It wasn't Karen. It was just a car. Life didn't need to stop every time a shadow passed. Inside, Dawn called for dinner. Grilled vegetables, fresh from Ellie's planter box. The windows were open. The lights were soft. There was no buzzing camera in the corner, no silent eye blinking in the dark. Just home. And that, Sarah thought, was the real ending. Not the confrontation. Not the lawsuits or the headlines. But this, the quiet, the wholeness, the unremarkable beauty of safety restored. Some stories don't end with applause or final battles. Some end with a girl growing sunflowers and a woman putting down her sword, not because the war is over, but because the garden has grown too wide for shadows to hide. And when the shadows return, as they always do, she'll be ready. But until then, the lavender blooms. The breeze carries laughter. And the watcher sees nothing but strength, silent and unwavering, rooted in soil and memory.